The script was written by Rob Dauber, who was a railway worker, and we just tried to tell the story from the point of view of a group of men who work on the tracks, maintenance track workers, what the effects of privatisation were, and how they were transformed, how they were changed from men with a permanent job, a secure job, to agency workers, to subcontractors, to individuals. Originally he wanted to call the film Freedom of Choice, because every time before the railways were privatised, when they were preparing the railways to be privatised, people would come and talk to them and say, of course, you have freedom of choice. You can either stay with the nationalised railways, or you can leave and get a large sum of money and be free and just work with one of the private companies. And it was always presented as freedom of choice for the railway workers. But the reality was that in fact there was no freedom of choice, because on the one hand the work disappeared from the place where the nationalised industry was, and all the work went to the private companies. So there was no freedom of choice, but there was this constant lie that it's up to you, you choose. But the politicians and the people who organised it manipulated the events so that in fact the railway workers had no choice at all, and they got less and less money if they stayed with the nationalised industry, and it looked as though the private companies were going to be given twice the money. Your wages went up. But of course, once everybody was in the private companies, then the wages went down. And it was this dishonest manipulation of the way the story was presented that made, well, he was angry about privatisation, but he was also angry about the dishonesty. And I think that's something that again will be common, wherever privatisations come in. The politicians will tell lies. Does the community of railway workers exist now as it did? I think the answer is no. That was one of the reasons why the railways were broken up. It was to destroy that tradition of work and that group of workers, because and to understand this you have to understand Margaret Thatcher's politics and the whole strand of politics that she represents. And so I have to go back to that. And her aim was to re-establish the profitability of capitalism in Britain. To do that, she had to destroy the power of organised labour. So her aim was to destroy the organised working class, the power of the organised working class. When people work as individuals for agencies or for subcontractors, they're not a coherent body of workers, so it's less easy to organise them. So it's more difficult for a trade union to organise. And again, this is from the right wing's point of view, this is one of the advantages of privatisation, because it's more difficult for trade unions to organise. No trade union, no regard for health and safety, and it's. But that was one of the reasons for the privatisation, was to destroy that solidarity, to destroy the strength of the trade union. People are more easy to control when they're fragmented. The railways were a big publicly owned industry, and they weren't privatised in her time, but by the next Prime Minister, who followed the same pattern, the same idea. And his aim, like with the coal mines, the miners, was to destroy that community of workers which had a strong trade union. They were good trade unionists. They had a long culture of working on the railways, a very strong idea of safety, a strong idea of solidarity, and a real commitment to the railways. The problem that the British railway workers had, which the writer Rob Dauber was very eloquent about, was the fact their trade union was too weak. They didn't plan a proper program of resistance, and the other trade unions didn't support them, because I think there's no doubt that organised labour, if it is well organised, if it has a serious program of resistance, it can win. We can win. But the British trade union rolled over. They didn't fight. But I think that a united, principled trade union movement can succeed. But it would be very hard, and they need support from across the whole trade union movement, and they need a leadership that won't betray. That's the problem. They need a leadership that will not do a deal with the government or the employer which will betray the principle they're fighting for. First of all, the subsidy that was given to the railways when they were owned by the public is much less than the subsidy now given to the private railway companies. So the private railway companies have a bigger subsidy than when the railways were nationalised, were owned by everyone. So if another country is thinking of privatising its railways, they should remember that it's more expensive. That's the first thing. The second thing is there was a big problem with safety, which was hidden, according to what railway workers said, it was hidden by the authorities, and because a lot of people were working on the railways who were not qualified. The third thing to say is that the way it was privatised, the railways were privatised, meant that the track was owned by a different company to the trains, and the track company lost so much money as a private company that it is now nationalised again. Although the government says that it is, they don't use that word, but effectively it's owned by the state again. And it is a complete mess. And it was a mess when it was privatised. It became more expensive when it was privatised to the taxpayer. The services have got worse. The fares have got massively more expensive. I mean, incredibly expensive. And if you go in the morning, first thing in the morning to Manchester, it's over £100. I mean, it's nearly 160, 170 euros return in second class. I mean, this is stupidity of a high order in pursuit of a kind of political dogma of privatisation. So in every respect it's a disaster. And of course it's also a disaster, it was a massive disaster for the railway workers, because a lot of them left the industry. A lot of them have become agency workers with no job security. A lot of them work for private contractors, and for them, they've lost the security and the stability of a permanent job. So on every count, it's been an absolute disaster.